There's a condition that is often referred to as childhood Alzheimer's. It's a rare and incurable genetic metabolic disorder called Sanfilippo Syndrome, and it causes progressive brain damage, dementia, and physical decline in children. In this episode, we talk to Abby Milburn, a wife and mom to 4 children, 5 years old and under. Her oldest daughter, Lottie, is extremely unique as she has both Down syndrome and Sanfilippo syndrome. Abby tells us about Lottie, their work with the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation, and facing delays in the FDA approval of a treatment that could help Lottie and others like her. She also shares her grief, joy, and hope. In recognition of Rare Disease Day, we are honored to share Lottie and Abby's story with you. Let's get started. I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Abby. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me, Kate. I'm very grateful that you reached out because any way to get some word out is always very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to talk about kind of a few things we wanted to make sure to get the word out and to let people know about. But first off, I was hoping that you could tell me some more about your daughter, Lottie.
Oh, Lottie is the best. Our daughter Lottie is 5 years old. She is our oldest of 4 kids. So everybody else is, yes. It's wild, which is why my mom is downstairs with all my kids because otherwise it would be impossible. Yeah, Lottie's our oldest, and she has a 3-year-old brother, almost 4, a 2-year-old sister, and a 1-year-old sister. So Lottie is just like the sweetest, most loving little person. She's very resilient. Lottie has Down syndrome. We knew that from before she was even born. We found out prenatally she would be born with Down syndrome. And then last May, we received her diagnosis of Sanfilippo syndrome, which is known as childhood Alzheimer's in a lot of circles. So she's been through a lot, and she has been through a lot even before that diagnosis. And for people who aren't familiar, Sanfilippo is terminal. It is a neurodegenerative disease, which basically means you are born without an enzyme that breaks down heparan sulfate, and it builds up like a toxin in your body. It affects all your cells throughout your entire nervous system, and it causes basically for every system to shut down and deteriorate. What most people notice first is a loss of cognitive skills, usually communication, and that is what we noticed with Lottie. When Lottie was 2 years old, she knew a bunch of sign language. She was trying to say at least 40 words that we, weren't maybe clear to other people, but we knew what she was trying to say. She was very receptive to learning new things and excited to try to do things. Unless it was walking, she always hated that. Any gross motor, that was not her gig ever. But yeah, when she was about 2 years old, we started to notice some things disappearing, skills disappearing. But yeah, and we can get back into that. But she has always just been a fighter, very strong. She's had a lot of surgeries, a lot of surprise hospital stays, and she is just the most resilient, sweetest little person who just would do no harm to anyone ever. A blessing, I guess, is that she doesn't know she's sick. And she also is so unaware that there is there are bad things in the world. She is just, everything about her is just goodness. And so we are so lucky to be her parents and be around her in that way.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can't imagine how challenging it has been as a mother. Like you said, you've kind of received this first information that
Right.
the pregnancy you're expecting, the child that you're expecting is not exactly how you envisioned.
Right. Yes.
And then you're but she's Lottie and you love her,
Yeah,
and you're
right, exactly.
you're and she is who she is. And then you find, okay, there's some other things now not progressing or regressing even. Was
Yes.
it hard to get her evaluated or to sort of tease that out and say, this is not related to Down syndrome? There's something else going on?
Yes. And I don't know how much you know. I had a cousin who had Sanfilippo syndrome. So for us, that helped us get her tested. When we first started noticing things with Lottie losing skills, she was already in PT, OT, speech, all the therapies, every developmental therapy, feeding therapy. We were already doing all those things. And I would say to her therapist, "Do you think, is that concerning that she's not using that sign anymore? Why isn't she doing that?" And some of them would just say, when especially kids with Down syndrome, when they're trying really hard to work on, let's say, walking, they might kind of neglect the communication aspect of things, and because they're trying so hard to learn to walk that maybe she doesn't want to, like, she's too almost too exhausted to put any effort into the communication piece right now. And at first that did make sense because we were, learning to walk. She had a walker. We were working really hard on that. And I thought, okay, I get that because she does get easily exhausted. And I did talk to doctors about it, and other things would come up too that we could never explain. A bloated belly,
Mhm.
an enlarged liver. We had it tested. It was, they said within the normal range, but it was larger. Her head grew very fast within her first year of life, but it was beneficial because she was also wearing a helmet and she got to get her helmet off faster. All these
Mhm.
things would come up and we would ask about it, and there did seem to be an explanation. And I think oftentimes people did assume it was because of Down syndrome. But when she really started like losing communication skills, like really got worried because I know that regression is not a piece of is something that's typical of a child with Down syndrome. Down syndrome causes developmental and cognitive delay and makes things more challenging for children with Down syndrome to learn these new skills. But once they learn them, it is really I would say rare to regress. There would be, I would typically say there's another diagnosis going on. And so, yes, I would say it was hard because even though Down syndrome is probably it's either the most or one of the most common genetic conditions, it's still really under researched. And I think it's easy for a specialist to look at just what they do, whether that's a therapist or a doctor, and to say, well, from, their standpoint, they're just looking at this one thing and they're not looking at the big picture of all of these things put together. And so when I would, mention my concerns, I think it was, again, easy to attribute it to potentially having something to do with Down syndrome. And last year, I don't know, because my cousin had Sanfilippo syndrome, and I did remember certain symptoms, but I didn't remember
I
them
was
all.
gonna say, how
Yeah,
much did you recall, and was it something like, some families I find talk about things like this often or
right,
kind of recall it, other families not so much, so I wasn't sure if it was
right.
something that was even on your radar.
Well, oddly enough, it was because when we got Lottie's prenatal diagnosis of her most likely having Down syndrome, we did the blood work after our 20-week ultrasound, or we went for an additional one, showed some soft markers of Down syndrome. So then we had the blood work done. We didn't end up doing an amnio. So then, they say it's not 100% positive if you just do the blood work, but it was pretty telling. It was about 95% chance. So at that point, we met with a genetic counselor, and they go through your family history. And so I mentioned my cousin Samantha had MPS 3 or mucopolysaccharidosis type A, 3
Mhm.
type A. And he was kind of interested, but I don't think he thought anything of it. He obviously let the doctor know that we brought that up, and the doctor was interested. But ultimately, after a lot of conversation, I just said, well, do you think our baby has Down syndrome, or do you think our baby has MPS 3? And he said, well, I think your baby has Down syndrome. And we never really discussed the fact that you could have both. And I think it's because it is so unlikely.
Right,
I guess that conversation, for whatever reason, made me think, okay, you can't have both then. So she has Down syndrome. You know what I mean?
right.
And he did discuss, like, talk about, if she's born and we don't think she actually has Down syndrome, then you need to have her tested for MPS. And we agreed. But she was born, she had a karyotype done. They found out she has trisomy 21 is the type of Down syndrome she has. And so after that, we were kind of like, okay, that's it. And we were just ready to move forward. It's like a 1 in 56 million chance of having both. So
Yeah,
after that, over the years, things would cross my mind. I think for the first couple of years, maybe not so much. She was developing pretty typically for a child with Down syndrome. And then, yeah, when she turned 2, and I also started to notice some facial features changing. I felt like her lips were fuller. I felt like her eyebrows were definitely full. We would get comments all the time about, oh, her eyebrows are so beautiful and so full. And it would kind of, for a second, like take me aback because I knew that was a feature of Sanfilippo syndrome. And I had, over the years, found families on Instagram, I think more interested in my cousin's history and kind of just wanted to see if there were other kids out there with Sanfilippo syndrome, and I, was learning a little bit more that I maybe wasn't aware of when my cousin was younger. But yeah, nothing really like dawned on me until last year. And she was in school and we thought, okay, she's going to like really take off now. She's got all these therapies in place. She's with both her neurotypical peers and her peers who have disabilities. And she's getting really the best of both worlds as far as teachers and classmates and therapists and they were very optimistic. They were so kind. And every time I would check in and say, "Hey, do you think she's losing skills?" And they didn't think she was losing them. It was more like a roller coaster, kind of like, she'll gain a little and then it'll kind of like she'll work on something else.
Right.
And then she'll, lose the skill for a little bit and it'll come back. But I really was seeing a decline in her communication. And then I don't know what made me look up Sanfilippo syndrome again.
Hmm.
I think it was something about the way Lottie moved. Children with Sanfilippo syndrome often experience joint stiffness. And I remember my cousin walking a little stiff. And I remember just thinking like things about Lottie reminded me of my cousin Samantha. And so I found a family on Instagram. I found a couple. And then I saw a video by her name is Erin. Her daughter's name is Liv. Their page is Saving Liv. And their video was about symptoms that led them to their diagnosis. And she brought up the facial features, which I had already seen on Lottie. I could see that her nose was a little broader than it was when she was a baby. Her lips were really full eyebrows. But then she started getting into things that we had always asked about and could never get a straight answer. The GI issues we could never figure out no matter what we did to her diet. And we are pretty strict with her. Um, the bloated belly we could never get rid of, the enlarged liver, the enlarged head, all these things that I really didn't know were specifically related to Sanfilippo syndrome, even with my cousin. And I could just see it. I could just see the features on her face. And then the regression piece obviously is huge. And I
Yeah.
think without that, maybe we wouldn't have been able to get Lottie tested.
Did you ever feel that there were, like, the providers or the people that were treating you, were
Mm-mm.
they dismissive, or were they trying to kind of bucket everything under Down syndrome, or like, "Oh, it's probably related to this because would be, in their mind, I guess, uncommon for there to be these 2 different things happening?"
Yes. I don't know. I don't feel like most were dismissive. I think we've had the rare, and Lottie has seen a lot of doctors.
Hmm.
So I would say the vast majority were trying to just be optimistic and trying not to probably scare us about, and I don't think they thought anything. And maybe given if I had shared my family history earlier, maybe they would. And there were times I thought about bringing it up, but I really thought that that was crazy. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to look insane. No, yeah, but I do think a little bit again was trying to your point, was trying to place it under this is just maybe another piece of her having Down syndrome, and this is what having Down syndrome looks like for her. Because every person with Down syndrome is so different. And that is another thing a lot of people would tell us. And yes, I do think a lot of her doctors would say, her medical history is a lot more extensive than other kids that we know, especially. We know a ton of children in our community who have Down syndrome. And I would agree, her medical history is much more extensive than theirs. And it would account for maybe losing skills for a little bit. But for them to never come back,
Mhm.
that's the part that
That you knew something else was
yes,
going on. And
yes.
what was it like? I mean, I've worked with families and with parents, in the prenatal setting,
Mhm.
similar, we're doing the testing, trying to see if there's additional things going on. But what was it like to then get confirmation that Lottie had Sanfilippo?
I mean, it was, and it still is, but it definitely was surreal. It didn't help that when we got the first test results back, I was at the zoo by myself with all of my kids, and for whatever I don't know why I even decided to call them back then, but I just couldn't wait anymore. And it was like I was listening to someone else's life being told to me. I couldn't believe it because, like I said, it had crossed my mind many times over the years, but I had just totally dismissed it because that seemed insane.
Hmm.
So when our genetic specialist here in Springfield, where we live, was also shocked. When I had taken Lottie in to our appointment with them, I laid everything out. I mean, I told them all of our concerns before I mentioned my cousin because I was hoping so badly she would be like, "Oh, it's this. We can give her this treatment." I had looked stuff up even that it was like that potentially having a kidney disease could cause regression cognitively, and I'm like, "Okay, maybe it's that because her liver was already enlarged and maybe that's really it just, who knows? I'm not a medically inclined person, so I'm trying to and I don't obviously, no parent wants to hear that your child has a terminal condition that has no cure and no available treatment yet, hopefully soon. So I laid everything out and then she basically told me what we were going to do. We came up with a plan, all these specialists we would see, and just these were all diagnostic things we had done. Sleep study, GI testing. We had had all this stuff
Right.
done. And so I just said, I don't want to well, she actually said, after all this is done, then we'll go down a rabbit hole. And I was like, well, I'm in the rabbit hole. And this is what I am concerned about. My cousin had Sanfilippo syndrome, and I am starting to see similarities in Lottie. And I guess I thought she was going to look at me and say, "Oh my gosh, that's so unlikely.
Right.
Absolutely not." And she just looked at Lottie and then said, I see the features on her face. And I said, "I do too." And she said, "And unfortunately that would account for the regression piece and all of these other things." And so we kind of went back and forth and she went and she spoke with her colleague and she came back and she said, we wouldn't have done the testing. Even she and if had you we not known about your family history, and had we not had all of these pieces put together because the facial features are one thing, but having the regression is another. And so, yeah, given my family history, we got her tested. So when she ended up calling me with the results, I think she was a little shocked herself because she was really hoping to just rule it out. So was I. I was hoping to get it out of my mind so we could look at something else. But it was shocking. I think some days it still is shocking. I think every parent uses the word devastating, heartbreaking, a little traumatizing. I mean, it is. It is definitely not something you would ever expect to say about your child that she has a form of childhood dementia. That is, most people don't know that exists. Give I mean, if I didn't have my cousin, I wouldn't either. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably why too, like, you had the suspicion, but I think, like, every parent hopes, well, maybe it's not that big a deal or hopes that
Right,
it's something else. And
right,
one of the things that in some of your writings, you talk about Down syndrome, you've seen that diagnosis as sort of a blessing or a gift, but Sanfilippo is not, I think,
right.
because what we've talked about with it being
Yes.
terminal and with the regression. How has that been trying to, I guess, navigate or is it a challenge navigating kind of 2 different diagnoses? I mean, again, Lottie's Lottie. Lottie is who she is. So, does it impact, where you try to go in terms of, like, therapy, support? I know you're involved, like, with the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation. Does that kind of the need there, is that sort of what drives you to kind of be as involved in that piece of it? I mean, how do you kind of figure out
Where to
where to put
put
your
my time?
time, energy? Yeah, yeah.
It is hard. I will say since her diagnosis, we have pretty much focused on the Sanfilippo piece of things. We went from her having Down syndrome and us just trying to show the world or show our community that our life is good and Lottie is who she is and people with disabilities are a part of life and disability is a part of life. And yes, were things going to be challenging for her even if she just had Down syndrome? Yeah, of course. But everybody faces certain challenges and we were ready to just, fight for whatever she needed, advocate for whatever she needed, whether that was in
Mhm.
school or medically or, one day when she either was going to live independently or live with us, just letting everybody know that her life is worthy simply because she exists. And we still believe that. But Sanfilippo now, we have gone from advocating to let everybody else know how important people with Down syndrome specifically, but disabilities are and how worthy everyone is of life to now fighting for Lottie's life and fighting for the lives of children who have Sanfilippo specifically, but also other rare terminal conditions that people don't know about. But yes, I mean, Now, when we go to doctor's appointments, depending on who we see, we now see a genetic specialist elsewhere in St. Louis, and she is more specialized, she actually sees other children with Sanfilippo syndrome, and so she's a little bit, oh, sorry, I froze. She's a little bit more specialized in this area, and she does see, I assume, children with Down syndrome, so she kind of can bridge the gap a little bit for us, but we have seen some doctors recently who I don't know how Sanfilippo syndrome or MPS3, I'm sure is how it comes up, mucopolysaccharidosis, is probably how it comes up in her chart. But I have had 2 doctor's appointments, well, Lottie has recently, where I could tell that they hadn't seen the diagnosis, and I then had to explain it to them.
Mhm.
And I don't want to disrespect the specialist, but we went recently to an appointment, and I could tell that they were only looking at her having Down syndrome, and that the certain thing we were looking at, was typical for children with Down syndrome, and talking about a potential surgery needing to happen. And I said, okay, well, and I don't know how this comes up in her chart, but with her also having Sanfilippo syndrome or MPS3, you know, doesn't that affect this as well? And you could tell just blank,
Yeah.
nothing. And I'm not even sure this person knew what I was talking about. Later, when they called me to tell me that, okay, maybe surgery isn't needed, we'll still do a diagnostic test. And this person explained, yes, with MPS3, this might be the cause of what we're seeing. And if that's the case, then we can't fix it with surgery, all these things. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of uncharted territory for, I would say, 99.9% of medical providers, and I can't fault anybody for that. There's again a 1 in 56 million chance of having both simultaneously. The comorbidity or co-occurrence is so rare. We've only been able to find through the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation, we didn't get specific information on this person, but they shared
Mhm.
with us that they found a case of a child who had both. They have since, unfortunately and sadly, passed away. But that is the only documented case we can find. Not to say there's not someone else, but it does give, us the perspective of, okay, we're going to really have to advocate for her now and really do our own research, because there will be things like a potential surgery that'll come up, and we have to decide if it's worth it or not. Because if the benefits don't outweigh the risk for her, then I don't want to do that to her. She's already had so many things done. I mean, my gosh, and crazy things that nobody's ever heard about. And there are things my husband and I think, look back on that we've had done or she's had done, and we wonder if it was worth it, like all the hospital time and the recovery time. She had a really major, awful infection after her really big surgery a year and a half ago, and she was in the hospital for 10 days and had a wound vac. It was awful.
Gosh.
And to think of her doing that now, and who knows if her body could even handle it, I don't know. So, yeah, it definitely changes. Yeah, it's a different way of looking at things now for sure.
Well, and you mentioned, and I've heard this from other parents that I've talked to with kiddos with rare disease, kiddos with more common ones like Down syndrome or any type of disability. It's about being
Mhm.
your own advocate and having to make sure that when you're interacting with the healthcare professionals, right, that they really know what's going on and
Yes.
you're the expert in your child. Like
Right.
they may have their expertise they've trained on, but you're the expertise in your child.
Yes.
One of the things that I wanted to chat more about is some of this advocacy work in terms of what's going on with some of the policies in terms of well, there's the treatment, but there's
Mhm.
also this like voucher program. So it's
Right.
the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review
So
Voucher
long.
Program.
Yes. I never get it
uh,
right. That was good.
or RPD-PRV was
I
one of
always
the
yeah.
things, but I
Yes.
was like, I can't remember the order.
No, it's
But
so
tell
long.
us a bit more about this voucher program. It passed in the House, but it's still waiting for a vote in the Senate. But what does it do or why is it so important?
So it actually got passed in the Senate. It
It
happened really
did.
quickly. It did, and it was
Okay,
signed into law on
great.
February 3rd. So thankfully, yes,
Okay.
the rare pediatric voucher. I say it wrong. Pediatric. It's terrible, but the
Voucher
voucher,
program.
the voucher program. It has been reinstated and will be, it will be in place until 2029. I
Okay.
mean, if as far as advocacy goes, people can still make sure that, when it kinda approaches that time again, 2028, 2029, that you're getting in the ear of your members of Congress and just saying, "Hey, we would really like you to reinstate this when it comes back around for vote," and just make sure that it doesn't get overlooked again. It really was held up, from my very limited understanding, held up by disagreement on, adding certain things that weren't necessarily related to
Mm,
the act itself, because it was also
right.
attached to the Give Kids a Chance Act. Yeah, and so it was held up for that reason, and it shouldn't have been. And over the last year, we're new to this world, but just from my understanding, companies were like smaller biotech companies are usually the ones that take on treatments for rare diseases. It's not going to be your big pharma companies, because rare diseases are not going to service a large population. Rare disease treatments are not going to service a large population because obviously these conditions are rare. And so the companies often don't make any money, or might even lose money, and this voucher is a way to ensure that, that doesn't happen. For example, if UX111 is passed this year, Ultragenics, the company that produces it, as far as I understand, is eligible to receive the voucher. And these vouchers can then be used on another treatment that they're working on or drug that they're working on. And then they can use that voucher to say, we would like to put this other treatment or this other drug that might be more lucrative, hopefully, through the expedited or the priority review process through the FDA. So the typical review process, I think, takes 10 months. The a priority review process takes 6. I still think it should be shorter, um, but it does help those companies. This voucher is also worth quite a bit of money. So companies can also use it to it can sell them and can make, oh gosh, I think one last year I read was, and I don't know if it got sold, but a company was selling it for $200 million. Last year, I know that a company bought one for $110 million. But they are ways to ensure that these smaller biotech companies who are servicing rare pediatric or rare diseases don't go under.
Right.
And I think a lot of companies last year chose not to go ahead with producing certain treatments that children with rare diseases needed, because they were going to lose money, because they knew they couldn't get the voucher if it went through with the FDA. And that's so sad. You know,
Yeah.
just hopefully now that it has been reinstated, companies like Ultragenics, companies that are producing these rare treatments, will be able to get them through to the FDA, get them approved, and then either receive a priority review process for another drug, or they'll be able to bring in revenue by selling the voucher. But we'll see, a lot of things have been getting held up in the FDA process now.
But it sounds like, well, I'm glad to hear that it did pass because, like you said, it's one of those things where in rare disease, not as common. It helps to continue to fund treatments, research in these
Yes.
spaces that
Right.
where, again, the vast majority of the population may not necessarily need it, but it's very
Right.
important and very needed. And then you mentioned, even as somebody who's works in the diagnostic industry, the FDA process is it's very, I mean, we could spend multiple
Oh,
episodes on that with
absolutely.
people much more well versed in
Yeah.
it than I am.
Oh, yeah, same.
But so you mentioned Ultragenics, so that's one of
Mhm.
the companies, and
Yes.
they've been working on a drug UX111.
Yes.
It's for kiddos with Sanfilippo syndrome.
Mhm.
And it's kind of been stalled or kind of been trying to go through this process, and I
Yes.
believe it's like a gene therapy. So I was
Yes.
wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what's going on with that or what your understanding is or what
Right.
people in your community understand it to be with what's going on.
Right. So UX111 is the first ever treatment for Sanfilippo syndrome type A. So there are 4 types: A, B, C, and D, and there are no approved treatments for any type of Sanfilippo syndrome. No
Mhm.
specific treatment meant to treat Sanfilippo syndrome. It would specifically treat children who have type A, and it is, like you said, a gene replacement therapy. So it would be a one-time fusion through an IV, I assume. I'm not medical. And the idea is that this vector, a non-harmful virus would deliver the non-mutated genes to the body, to every cell in the body, and it did cross the blood-brain barrier, which for anybody in this rare disease community, especially with diseases that affect the brain, that's huge, and it should hopefully replace some of the mutated genes, which then means the buildup of the toxin heparan sulfate starts to go down, which releases, gets rid of inflammation and all of these things. And the children who received this treatment through clinical trials, it's been years now, it's been at least 4 or 5. They are due, if not more, it might be more because it's been around for 8.5, almost, getting close to a decade.
Okay.
It has a lot of research and data backing it, and these children are doing substantially better than comparing it to the natural history of how this disease progresses in children. They were able to maintain skills much longer. Children who received the treatment under 2 years old are doing, from my knowledge, are doing so much better, to a point where at one point I read something that a mom said, we forget that he has Sanfilippo syndrome because their child is doing so well. And
Mhm.
I'm sure there are still, there could very well be developmental delays still. But their children are doing better. They're living, lives with a little less pain and less regression, and that's enormous. The results are undeniable. So the FDA, Ultragenics submitted it to the FDA 2024, 2025, and they received a CRL, a complete response letter from the FDA in July of last year, and it basically stated that they agree the data's so good, it's robust. They had no problems with what they saw as far as how it helped patients. They just had problems with manufacturing issues, and so things were delayed for 6 months.
Mhm.
Families like ours tried very hard in the fall and early winter to see if the process could be sped up at all. Because 6 months in this world is a loss of immense amount of skills, especially for children that are a little older. Lottie in the summer was still using about 10 signs in American Sign Language. That is a small fraction of what she was able to do. But now, over 6 months, 7 months later, she really doesn't use any ASL sign consistently. Every now and again, I'll see it'll look like she's signing mom or dad,
Mhm.
but I don't know. Before it was purposeful and you could tell, and now it's hard to tell. And other kids are losing way more skills and way more in more terrifying situations where they're getting sick and their
Mhm.
bodies just can't handle things as well anymore. Eating is another thing we worry about with Lottie now. Her drinking liquids is really dangerous. We thicken her liquids. We do all these things. We work with a feeding therapist, but we are basically fighting against her needing a G tube, which she probably will very soon, to be perfectly honest. And you have to wonder that if that delay didn't happen, if we could have maintained her skills a little better, where we're not constantly worried if she's aspirating or choking. So that has been something. But Ultragenics resubmitted their BLA to the FDA, I think on January 30th of this year, so 2026. And already there has been a pause in the process. A couple weeks ago, or maybe it was, almost a couple weeks ago, the FDA served them an incomplete response letter. So it's not a no, and it's not another
Right.
6-month delay. But now they are requesting that Ultragenics provide certain documentation, and it is related to the same issues they were seeing in July, but they just want the documentation stating what Ultragenics has fixed since then. Ultragenics has come out and said that they have that information, and they were prepared to provide that documentation later in the process, because it was their understanding that that documentation is asked for during the inspection part of the process. But I think it seems, and I've read some other things recently too, that, the FDA has promised transparency, that they will be more transparent about their process and more in better communication with the companies that they're working with. But I think this week with the Senate meeting coming up so it'll be February 26th, and I don't know when this will air, but I think a big thing they're going to talk about is, we need to be more aware of when certain things are expected in the process. It sounds like the companies are kind of subject to a lot of, what's the word? Inconsistency as far as they don't know what to expect at a certain point in the process, and they would just like to know because I think as Ultragenics has stated, they were ready to provide that at a later time. They didn't realize that they needed to provide it up front because it sounds like the last time they were in review, they didn't have to provide it up front. So it's inconsistent that way, and that's confusing, and then it puts these treatments just at a blockade for what? I don't
Yeah.
some
Like paperwork, red tape,
right, right.
bureaucracy, and I think that's something that I mean, it's frustrating regardless of what the cause is, but that's even more frustrating to say, "Okay, well, but there's" like, as you were talking about, there are people waiting on this, and there are kids where this really can make a difference.
Huge difference, yes.
So tell us what's going on the 26th. They're doing an additional hearing, or is
Mhm.
some of the additional review is happening?
So I think that this is just, and I could be wrong, it's like the aging committee through the Senate. They are meeting with, and actually they have panelists and different speakers, and one of the speakers is Cara O'Neill with the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation. And I think the goal is just to maybe prompt the Senate or at least the aging committee to help, I don't know, get the FDA to hold true to these promises that they've been making, to be more transparent, to consider, that this system or this process, even the 6-month priority review is a little outdated, especially when it comes to um, diseases that are so progressive and neurodegenerative. We need to have a faster way of reviewing, and they're not saying that nobody wants them to skip steps or to overlook things, but there doesn't seem I think technology is moving forward. All these treatments are trying to move forward and build upon each other, and one company sees, one company do something amazing with a treatment, and then that company can build on it, but that can't happen if the FDA keeps pausing all of these treatments, and it really is blocking innovation and us being able to move forward with treatments when nothing is getting approved. And then it goes back to, well, then the companies don't feel that they should be producing these treatments. And it just keeps it's a nonstop cycle. And hopefully, people will be receptive. I don't know.
Mhm.
I think I'm hoping that members of the FDA will be at that meeting or present to at least listen to it. I don't know. I know that there's, always staffing issues somewhere and they can only do what they can do it, but it does just feel like the process that is in place needs to be reevaluated and fixed. And that's, my very basic understanding of as a mom who's just trying to like figure out why her kid can't get a very obvious treatment.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, and I think that has got to be extremely frustrating and disappointing, especially in terms of, like, the promises that things will be changing,
Yes.
but again, not necessarily seeing that come to fruition. I know that we've covered a bit, and I wanted to know if there was, like, one thing that you wanted the listeners to walk away with from this conversation or from Lottie's story, if there was anything that you wanted them to remember from the conversation.
Gosh, I mean, so many things. I mean, maybe a couple. I think a really big thing that I've tried to remind myself and just stay present because it is really hard and I want to be present for my family is that two things can exist at once. I mean, and I think I've seen many other families say the same thing on social media. You can have so much joy in a moment and something can be so funny and so wonderful, and you can still have that grief hanging there, but it doesn't need to take over everything. And it does sometimes. And, like, for Lottie's diagnosis, for example, I mean, my son and my daughter were fighting over who gets to feed the goats at the zoo, and it was kind of funny. And I'm also hearing on the phone that my daughter has a terminal illness, and it was like, you can look back on that moment, it was horrible, but it was also, a nice, like, okay, there's also levity to these situations. And I think it's okay to feel a little hopeless and to still hold out hope. I think a lot of days, I get up and things are hard and I feel like we're not getting anywhere and I do feel a little hopeless. And then I feel also at the same time that I'm still holding out hope that she'll be able to get treatment, that we'll be able to figure things out for her so that we can keep her as healthy as we possibly can and keep her personality, outward as long as we possibly can. But yeah, I think that's a big one. And I also think anybody can help. And I think it's important to remember, and I don't mean this to like scare anyone, but I think I didn't think about this before I had Lottie, was that anybody can have a child with a disability or medical conditions or a genetic condition. Anybody can have one. And so if we can all come to like a place of understanding, and instead of looking the other way because that's really sad, but that won't ever happen to me. And I do think, I've done that. Of course, because you just like think, oh my gosh, how sad. That's so sad. And then you move on. But if we thought of it from a place of, wow, that I don't know what my genetic code holds. And honestly, and you know this better than I do, we know that even genetic testing does not test everything. You can't. There's so much. And so if you thought about that from that perspective and thought, wow, what would happen if this happened to me, and what would I want to happen? Well, you would want somebody to say, your child has this condition, but there's a treatment. We can help you. We know what to do. And so just knowing that you can use your voice to help in any way you can, if you specifically, anyone out there is now interested in Sanfilippo syndrome, the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation is wonderful. There are other foundations you can also look into, but start following people on, like you've done, on social media. And it really is huge to reshare family stories. When a parent makes a reel or a post, it is oddly emotional and really hard to put out there. And if you could share that, it could reach, a population of people we would never ever otherwise speak to, or who would never otherwise know about a certain condition, specifically maybe Sanfilippo syndrome in this case. I know that's a lot, so I'm sure your listeners might now be very confused on what I would like them to take away.
No, I think that
But
that's fantastic, because it is just being able to have that grace, that empathy to say, okay, how would I feel in this
right,
situation, or what would help me or help my child, and just sort of think about it through that lens. And we'll also put in some of the resources that you mentioned and organizations that you mentioned, your account as well, like in the show notes, so people can go follow them or reshare,
that's
and
awesome.
get the
Thank
word
you.
out.
Yeah,
Because I
that'd
think
be
that's just
great.
a huge piece too, is there's a lot going on, but this is definitely an area where there's need, and so you want
Yes,
that focus on it and
yes.
some time on it.
Yeah, I mean, and who knows? We've gotten pretty far. I feel like I've done things lately I would have never done. I've contacted politicians, and their teams have gotten back to me, and we've talked about the issues and as I see them, and they've contacted the Cure Sanfilippo Foundation. And so you really just never know who needs to learn about this or hear about it, because that's the first step, is exposure. Most people don't know that, these rare
Mhm.
diseases exist. And yeah, it's huge to get attention on them. And if you ever feel inclined, research and everything, as we've kind of talked about, is extremely expensive. And donations, even like $1, it goes a long way just to even see that, oh, that person donated. Maybe I should look into this foundation as well. And if you can't do that, then like we said, it just even learning about these families on Instagram or Facebook, or a lot of people are on TikTok and sharing their videos and their reels and their posts, because it does help. I think it is helping. And then hopefully if we just keep, pushing through, we'll start seeing a little bit more change happening.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Abby, for being on
Thanks,
the show,
Kate.
and
Thank you.
just and sharing all this. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about. Just again, just very much appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having us on. It means a lot.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. This link is also in the show notes for easy access. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/allaccessdna and consider donating to get bonus content, submit questions for our guests, and connect with other genetic curious individuals. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. All Access DNA is hosted, produced, and edited by Kate Wilson. The logo design is by Designs by NKJ. Thanks for listening, and join us next time.